There has been quite a brouhaha at State Broadcaster Television New Zealand in the last week over a man called Kamal Santamaria, who was with great fanfare brought in to co-host with, I don't know, the football team that sits on a couch at this light entertainment show called Breakfast Television. The beloved, fabulous, marvellous John Campbell suddenly became a senior correspondent, which is the last step before getting your gold watch in a lot of jobs. He was moved aside for hotshot war correspondent, Al Jazeera journalist Kamal Santamaria, who was returning to TVNZ in, I don't know, a cloud of glory. Didn't last long, 32 days, and Kamal has resigned amidst allegations, suggestions, reports that female members of staff had complained about his conduct and that people had complained about his conduct before at Al Jazeera. And then questions raised about how he was appointed. And now we have the head of news at TVNZ, Paul Jurisic, on, well, he's gone on leave suddenly. I don't think it's the long weekend. And we have the head of Television New Zealand, former National Party Cabinet Minister Simon Powers, saying, we are sorry that we originally said that Mr. Santamaria had to deal with a family matter. I don't know why he had to apologise for that, but something is up at TVNZ, and a person who might be able to help unpick this, and you might think this is odd, but because of the position that he occupies as founder of the Spinoff, who occupy a different part of the editorial world than the platform does, but he is a guy who keeps a really close eye on what's happening in the media, and because he doesn't work for Television New Zealand, I thought he'd be the best person to give us the most expert and unbiased take on the craziness that has been TVNZ this week. His name is Duncan Greive. He's the founder of the Spinoff, and he joins us now. Duncan, lovely to have you on the platform, my friend.
Well, Sean, it's good to be here.
All right. Well, firstly, can we just get this in context? I've had friends say to me, there has not been a scandal, a cluster F like this in television or news media since the famous John Hawkesby affair where he walked away with $7 million from TVNZ.
I think that's quite a long bow to draw.
Oh.
I mean, you were just talking about John Campbell before. I feel like that, when his show had been axed but was still on the air and he was campaigning to save it, and you had street protests outside during the Save Campbell Live era, and then
Good point.
he left, Hillary Barry resigned, the absolute ongoing circus that was MediaWorks around 2016, which I reported on and quite enjoyed reporting on, felt at least sort of like a bigger, more sustained and long-running thing of this. I mean,
but you weren't alive. Were you alive during the John Hawkesby thing?
I do remember the John Hawkesby thing. I wasn't a reporter.
That was big. He got millions, mate.
Yeah, I'm not saying. I mean, that was enormous because he got the $7 million for basically a couple of weeks' work.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I don't think the Santamaria thing is white hot right now, but I think that there have been several kind of incidents in the meantime which probably, rise to a similar level, or in my opinion, probably outrank it.
Yeah. Okay. So, what has, for someone who hasn't been taking a perverse pleasure in watching this unfold, walk the person in the street through essentially what's happened here, Duncan?
Sure. So, as you said, Kamal Santamaria, he's an Al Jazeera broadcaster. Got to start here on 3 News, now known as News Hub. About 20-odd years ago, was well regarded. Went as so many New Zealand journalists went off to Al Jazeera. Did very well there. Became one of their sort of key anchors, but has been looking to come back to New Zealand for some time. We published a profile of him, and I've had a bit of correspondence with him over the years to that effect. And in some ways, he got a lucky break when Paul Jurisic, who was his EP and a close colleague over at Al Jazeera was appointed.
So they were
mates.
mates. They were mates, Duncan. We can presume they were mates.
I think, well, I'm not sure about whether it rises to the level of mates, but yeah, you could probably make that assumption. So yeah, that was in September 2020. Then John Campbell makes his intention to move to a new role known, and Jurisic thinks of his former colleague and installs Santa Maria on that breakfast couch.
Well, I just want to clarify, because that's quite important. So you're saying John Campbell jumped and was not pushed?
Look, I don't have any information to that effect. All I know is that breakfast has been rating well, and Campbell is a big star, and he's the kind of big star who gets to choose what he wants to do. So my assumption would be that, he's seen what Guyon is doing at RNZ and what Paddy's doing at 3 and gone...
Oh, Paddy Duncan has just got the dream job. Paddy is living the dream. The taxpayer funds him for through New Zealand On Air to go on the lash. I mean, that's the dream job, mate. He has made it.
It does seem like quite a good gig. But, anyway, regardless of how the position opened up, Santa Maria was installed, and, within... it's a matter of weeks before he is mysteriously off screens. There's no reference made to it on air, and then the report comes over the weekend that he has resigned to deal with a family emergency. That is the line that comes out of TVNZ. Now that story starts to unravel very, very quickly. I think later that afternoon there is I think it was Simon Plum at Staff revealed that there was. Had been complaints made about him. The following day, the language changes from family emergency to personal reasons to just a resignation. Then women start coming forward to say that they'd had bad experience with him at Al Jazeera. Someone in NZME said that they'd had direct messages from him that that read as quite sleazy. TVNZ sort of sends these internal emails which attempt to sort of draw a bow around the affair, but actually only make people more angry.
That was hilarious. A day or two ago, someone leaks the memo saying that you bastards shouldn't be leaking memos. That was just hilarious.
It was, and I was talking to a friend who works in comms about this earlier this week, who said, when you send out an email of that nature, they're designed to be leaked. You're sending them out to 600 people, and the idea is that you craft them knowing that they're going to be leaked, and that they should be leaked. When they're leaked, they should put the organisation in a good light. And Andrew Fernie, who's a sort of senior manager within News, has, maybe they didn't know that, but there is a bit of a vacuum in senior comms people at TVNZ at the moment. But either way, he has, replied to all staff saying, this is a moment when we should be hanging together. How dare you do this to our new chief executive? Which, of course, was immediately leaked itself. And then there were replies to that, which were also leaked. And so you have this original incident, which is bad enough and has many layers to it, because there's the Al Jazeera allegations.
Yeah.
How much did TVNZ know, or how much did Jurisic know? These are open questions. But the fact of it being managed so poorly from TVNZ side is really what's made it the story that's rolled all week. And then I think above it all, and this is what massively increases the tension, is that in July they start merging TVNZ with RNZ. So the stability that this organisation has known for decades is suddenly imperiled, and right at the moment that it's about to go into this process, it has this giant, embarrassing public fallout.
And I guess, too, many have been asking, which culture, particularly in news and current affairs, will the culture of Radio New Zealand or Television New Zealand be dominant in this merger? And I guess you would have to say this absolute dysfunction at Television New Zealand means that RNZ is in the box seat when it comes to imposing its cultural imperatives on the merged entity?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about cultural imperatives so much as, I think that every newsroom has its own culture and way of doing things, and often that does come down to people in critical roles. And one of the key sort of areas of not necessarily efficiencies, but where the combined might be able to be greater than the whole kind of thing, is the idea that if you add the RNZ newsroom to the TVNZ newsroom and create something that outputs for radio and video and digital, then you'll have a pretty powerful and scaled operation. And the cultural thing that I think is interesting is who runs that, because that is enormously important, and it's...
Well, you would think, from what we've seen from the TVNZ newsroom, some collective commune runs it, because they seem to be saying that the staff should have input into who management hires to front programs.
Yeah, I thought that was somewhat odd. I mean, I don't think you can hire by committee, and but if there is there is a consultation with the people you'll be working closely with, I think makes a lot of sense, especially where there's on-air kind of chemistry. So if you work at breakfast, for example, and you're on the couch with this person, you'd expect to kind of eyeball it and be able to sort of quietly ask around. If you're a producer who works closely with this person, you might expect to have some visibility over the hire. If you work somewhere else in news, well, no, of course not. That's not plausible at all. So, yeah, but I do think, going back to the sort of culture thing, the TVNZ newsroom will be insecure about, it doesn't want to be taken over by some outside organisation, even one that it might have some admiration for in RNZ. It wants to be its own thing. And that's why this will really sting, is that if it imperils that, or if it provides a natural opening for the establishment board of the new public media entity, as it's known, to say, well, news is RNZ's, everything else is TVNZ, and we'll sort of figure the rest out, then that's a real problem.
Yeah, and I guess the question is breakfast news or some sort of light thing anyway? The line's been blurred somewhat. Paul Jurisic, the head of news, is not at work at present. What do we read into that, Duncan?
I personally think this is very hard to survive for Jurisic. It's the kind of hire, the first big one in terms of the public-facing side of his career as head of news. Yes, you could make the argument about whether breakfast should sit under the purview of news at all. I personally think that they are just on the news side. Yes, it's light entertainment, but probably less. There's more news in breakfast than 7 Sharp, I would argue, for example. And because he was an EP, you do work closely with that kind of figure, and. I think that there is just a real concern that, about what he knew, about the judgment that shows. And
so he's going to be the sacrificial lamb here, perhaps?
Well, is it the sacrificial lamb or is it accountability?
Yeah, And good call. I see what you're saying. That he pays the price.
I've spoken to some people. Yeah, I've spoken to some people at TVNZ who have suggested that he, isn't necessarily the most well liked, and that's not always the job there. But that he hasn't had the kind of empathy or humanity that those news editors need in that job, and the fact of him going on special leave at this point is, that's often the prelude to has.
Yeah, I think we can all see what is probably coming here. Well, what about all the other, I guess, traditional legacy lamestream TV news organisation, News Hub? Have they been making hay while the sun shines? Because it seems to me the most critical coverage of Television New Zealand has been coming from Television New Zealand.
I think that's actually the best argument in favour of the TVNZ newsroom being allowed to kind of maintain its own mana through the merger, is that this led to 6 p.m. news on Sunday. I mean, that's a big, bold piece of editorial decision making.
Or just absolutely self-indulgent, narcissistic navel-gazing.
But look, I can see both those arguments. I think there was a lot of public interest in it at the time, and I actually think the package was fantastic. Which Kim Baker-Wilson handled a very difficult assignment very well. But yeah, you could, I can also see why people are like, this is one personnel decision. It's an off-peak show. Why is it leading the news? I think that's a rational argument too. As far as News Hub goes, they've had some good scoops on as well. They were in on the Al Jazeera stuff well, but the whole of the media, the mainstream media, I think has done quite well here. I think Katie Harris at the Herald has been very fast and often quite funny with the leaks. Simon Plum has led its stuff. So, media can often enjoy this kind of thing, and I think there is a bit of a problem for TVNZ in that TVNZ to me is a little bit like the National Party. It's born to rule. It has this assumption that it governs as of right, and it's got more money. It doesn't have to, it stopped having to necessarily pay a dividend to the government a few years ago, and it's sort of, if you're the
doesn't
rest of the
have
media,
to go cap in hand to the government for funding like the Spinoff does.
Oh, TVNZ gets tens of millions of dollars more in funding than the Spinoff does.
But you get millions and millions, eh?
Oh, we actually don't. We make productions which are through Hexwork Productions that show on the Spinoff, but the Spinoff itself doesn't. But that's not really the point. The point is that
no, that was just me being cheeky, Duncan.
I know. We've been here before. No, I think the thing that's interesting is that that the private sector media, all of us look at TVNZ and go, man, you've got a pretty good wicket that you're on there. And so when something like, and for 10 years, under the previous CEO, Kevin Kenrick, they pretty much ran a pretty tight ship. There wasn't a lot of this kind of chaos there. And so there can be elements of schadenfreude that happen when that sort of big brother that's sort of always first picked has a bit of a stumble. And I think that is also part of the undercurrent that drives this story.
Yeah. Now, who is going to replace Mr. Santa Maria? They've got 3 presenters. Why do you need a 4th?
It is interesting. Right? So someone suggested to me privately that they should just keep adding people until they've got enough for a first 15 on that couch. And that but look, that's kind of breakfast sort of special sauce in a way. Whereas AM on 3 is a much more that's shrunk versus the AM show. Its predecessor, which had 3 hosts. Breakfast is going the other way. In terms of who's going to replace them, I think they're in a bit of a bind here. Scotty Stevenson had previously been on a contract. He's a very good broadcaster to do sort of fill-in hosting. He's no longer doing that, and he would have been a candidate. Someone jokingly suggested to me that Matt Heath might join Jeremy Wells and at the other end of the table. I can't really see that given his sensibility. It's a tough gig. You have to get up at 3 a.m, 5 days a week,
be still my beating heart. I'm playing a violin here.
True.
It's called
Very
broadcasting,
true.
Duncan.
Very true.
It
is called broadcasting, and it's a gig that people would crawl over broken glass for. But to do it well, you have to have a particular skill set, and there's not heaps of people with it. And if after a debacle like this, I guess some people might look at it twice. So yeah, I've got no idea what they do there.
Sorry, enough, Paul. Okay.
Fair enough.
So how long is Jurisic gone? Is this going to be days or weeks before we see him making new career choices?
I don't know. I mean, TVNZ will be just praying. I think the news about Jurisic being on special leave broke yesterday. That marks 5 days in a row that there was a sort of significant beat to the story. What they'll be really hoping is that they can,
have a breather over the long weekend.
Have a breather over the long weekend, and start to kind of, rather than the story happening to them and then having to react to it, because basically the last time they had any control over this was sort of Saturday morning. If they can start to issue press releases rather than have the news leak, and if the sort of next decisions feel like they're made proactively rather than reactively, then they'll consider that a win. But we're probably a week away from knowing what that's like. And they've got the sort of cover of this lawyer doing an inquiry into the hiring process or hiring processes, and so they can. It's that classic, government thing when you announce an inquiry and
come
then you
out
don't
systemic problems, and we'll do better in future. You can write that headline now, can't you?
Exactly.
Really. Hey, Duncan, thank you so much for coming on, because as I say, you do keep a much closer eye on this than I think is healthy for most normal people, but it means you know what's going on. Lovely to have you on the platform, and enjoy your long weekend.
Thank you, Sean. Same to you.
Cheers, brother. That is Duncan Greive. He is the founder of the Spinoff.